In July of 1909, a brand new ocean liner steamed out of a South African harbor, bound for Cape Town with 211 people aboard. She sailed over the horizon into a rising storm and simply ceased to exist. No wreck was ever found. No lifeboat, no debris, not a single body. For more than a century, the sea off that coast has kept her secret completely. Her name was the Waratah, the pride of her shipping line, and she was meant to be one of the safest ships ever to put to sea. She had been built in Scotland just a year earlier on the Clyde at Glasgow for the long emigrant run between Britain and Australia, carrying hundreds of people toward new lives on the far side of the world. She was a floating palace, grand state rooms, a music lounge with its own gallery, even a nursery for the children, and panels carved with the red Waratah flower she was named for. Above all, she was built to be unsinkable. A double bottom ran the whole length of her hull, and inside she was divided into 8 watertight compartments. Her makers said she was practically immune from any danger of sinking. The most respected name in shipping inspected her from her first rivet to her final trial, and gave her their very highest mark. On paper, she was as safe as a ship could possibly be, and yet there was the matter of her name. 4 ships had carried the name Waratah before her across 60 years of sailing. Every single one of them had been lost at sea. Wireless was still a new and unreliable thing in those days, and the Waratah carried no set that could call for help across the open ocean. If she ever met trouble far from shore, she would face it alone and in silence. There had been one quiet warning, easy to forget. On her maiden voyage, a fire had started deep in one of her coal bunkers, smoldering for days before the crew finally beat it out. It was repaired and put out of mind. Her captain, Josiah Ilbery, was a veteran of 30 years at sea and the most senior commander the line had. There seemed no reason on earth to fear for her, but some who sailed that maiden voyage came away quietly uneasy. The great ship, they said, did not feel quite right beneath their feet. She seemed top-heavy. In rough seas, she would lean hard to one side and hang there, slow to right herself, before rolling ponderously back the other way. One passenger, a physicist, noticed the water would not drain from his bath while she lay over on her side for hours at a time. He worked out that her balance sat on a knife's edge. Tip her far enough, and she would simply rest there, leaning, waiting for the sea to push her back. Even Captain Ilbery, it was later said, had been uneasy about how hard she was to load and keep steady, and sharp words had passed between her owners and her builders. But nothing was changed, and she sailed on. One passenger, an experienced traveler named Claude Sawyer, grew so uneasy that he began to watch how the ship moved, and he did not like the answer he found. Then came the dreams. Night after night, Sawyer saw the same figure rise from the waves, dressed in a strange way he had never seen. A long sword in one hand, and in the other a cloth soaked in blood, held out between himself and the ship. He was so shaken that when the Waratah reached the port of Durban, he made a decision that would save his life. He gathered his things and went ashore. He sent a telegram to his wife with just a few blunt words, booked for Cape Town, thought the Waratah top-heavy, landed at Durban. His friends still aboard thought he was being foolish. On the evening of the 26th of July, he stood on the dock and watched her sail without him. Deep in her holds, she carried 1,000 tons of heavy lead and coal stacked high. She sat low and waited in the water as she slipped out past the harbor lights into the dark. 211 people remained on board, families, children, sailors, and the captain, a cross-section of the age, all of them simply bound for home. Before dawn the next morning, off a wild and lonely stretch of coast, the Waratah came up behind another steamer, the Clan McIntyre. The 2 ships exchanged signals by lamp, their names, their destinations, the ordinary courtesies of the sea. The Waratah wished the other ship a pleasant passage. Then, faster and stronger, she drew ahead and steamed off toward the southwest. By 9:30 in the morning, she was only a smudge of smoke on the skyline. Then even the smoke was gone. And that was the last that anyone would ever certainly see of the Waratah. And here the strange part begins, because over the next 2 days, the Waratah would be seen again and again by people who could never quite agree on what they were looking at. That same evening, a steamer called the Harlow saw a large ship coming up astern, trailing so much smoke that her captain wondered aloud if the stranger was on fire. When darkness fell, the Harlow's crew watched the ship's running lights draw closer behind them. Then, suddenly, two brilliant flashes lit the night, and the lights were simply gone. The captain was sure he had just seen an explosion. His mate insisted it was only bushfires burning on the distant shore. They could not agree, and in the end, they wrote nothing in the log at all. A little later, another liner, the Guelph, passed a steamer in the rain and signaled to her. But the weather was so bad that her crew could make out only the last three letters of the stranger's name, T-A-H. And the next day, on a cliff top above the wild coast, a young soldier named Joe Conker raised a telescope to his eye and saw a steamer struggling slowly through enormous seas. He watched her roll hard onto her side, and he waited for her to come back up. Instead, a great wave rolled across her, and when it had passed, the ship was gone. Conker reported what he had seen. No one took the young soldier seriously. For 20 years he kept the memory to himself, and only late in life did he speak of it again, still certain of exactly what he had watched go under. Whatever the truth of those scattered sightings, one thing is certain. That night, the weather turned savage. By the next day, it had become a cyclone, and the captain of the clan McIntyre called it the worst storm of his life at sea. And this was no ordinary sea. It was one of the most dangerous stretches of ocean in the world, where a powerful warm current runs hard against the swell, and sailors had long called the shore a graveyard. There, the water can rear up without warning into a single freak wave as tall as a building. For years, such waves were dismissed as sailors' tall tales, until generations later, instruments finally proved that they were real. The Waratah was due in Cape Town on the 29th of July. The day came and went, and her berth at the quay stayed empty. At first, no one was truly alarmed. Ships ran late all the time. People told themselves she had broken down and was drifting, just as another liner once had, helpless for 100 days before she was finally towed in. The Waratah had food aboard for a year. Surely she was out there still. Then, on the 10th of August, came a cable. A blue anchor ship had been sighted far out, limping slowly toward Durban. In Adelaide, they rang the town bells in relief. But the ship out there was not the Waratah, and so the days stretched into weeks. A cold understanding settled over everyone. A great modern liner full of people had vanished without a single word. What followed was one of the largest sea searches the world had yet seen. Tugs, warships, and chartered steamers swept thousands of miles of empty ocean. The Navy sent its cruisers out into the same waters. One of them met seas so violent that they strained her hull and sent her limping back to dry dock. The very ocean that had taken the Waratah was now beating off the ships, hunting for her. One ship was sent to follow the very path a drifting wreck might take. She swept 14,000 miles of open ocean by searchlight, day and night, for 8 weeks. Another searched the cold and lonely islands far to the south, even landing men ashore to look for castaways. They found nothing. Not a lifebelt, not a deck chair, not an oar. It was as if the ocean had swallowed the ship whole and quietly smoothed the surface over. And yet, the sea did not stay entirely silent. One steamer reported bodies far out in the water near the place she was last seen, what looked like a man and a child rising and falling in the swell. A tug was sent racing out to recover them, but by the time it reached the spot, the shapes had drifted away into the empty sea. What little it did pull from the water turned out to be whale remains and dead fish. The dead it had promised were never found. Months later, the sea handed back a few fragments: a deck chair, a torn cushion, a lifebuoy washed up on far-off beaches, but not one of them could be certainly tied to the Waratah. The sea gave back pieces and kept the proof. A lifebelt marked with her name was said to have come ashore far away in New Zealand. A pilot swore he had spotted a wreck from the air along the coast, but neither was ever confirmed, and the wreck, if it was one, was never seen again. After 4 long months, and not one certain trace, the Waratah was posted at Lloyd's of London as missing. A great bell was rung for her. the old sign that a ship was never coming home. The loss was so devastating that the shipping line itself never recovered. Ticket sales collapsed. The rest of her fleet was sold off, and within a year the company was gone, as if the disaster had pulled the whole firm under with the ship. In 1910, an official inquiry opened in London to ask an almost impossible question: how does a great ship, with hundreds aboard, leave no trace at all? It was a strange inquiry, because almost no one who could truly answer was still alive. With no survivors but Sawyer and the handful who had stepped off at Durban, they could only question those who had sailed her on earlier voyages. Her builders swore she had been soundly made and given the highest possible rating. But passenger after passenger described the same thing: a ship that rolled wrong and was always slow to come back up. And yet for every witness who called her dangerous, another swore she was steady and a pleasure to sail on. The evidence canceled itself out, leaving only a fog of contradictions. And Claude Sawyer, the man who had fled at Durban, stood before the inquiry and told them of his calculations and of his terrible dreams. He had walked away, and he had lived. In the end, the inquiry could reach no firm conclusion. It decided only that the Waratah had been lost in the gale, but exactly how, no one could say. The theories have circled ever since. Perhaps the 1,000 tons of lead in her holds turned to a heavy sliding liquid in the rolling and shifted all at once and laid her over past any hope of saving. Perhaps she was simply top-heavy, just as Sawyer had feared, and one wave too many laid her over in the dark. Perhaps a single freak wave the coast is feared for stove in her hatches and pulled her straight down in moments, trapping every body and every plank beneath her as she went. It would explain why the sea gave nothing back. Or perhaps, as the captain of the Harlow always believed, the coal deep in her bunkers exploded in the night. 2 bright flashes, and then nothing at all. Whatever happened, it must have happened fast. There was no distress call, no wreckage, no sign that anyone had time to launch a single boat. For decades afterward, the Waratah became an obsession. Divers and salvage experts hunted her across the seabed, certain she had to be down there somewhere. One man gave much of his life to the search, convinced that the soldier on the clifftop had seen the truth and that she lay where Joe Conker said she went down. Year after year, expedition after expedition, he hunted that one patch of sea. And in 1999, his sonar found something, a wreck, about the right size in almost the right place. For one bright moment, the world believed the mystery was finally solved. But when the divers reached it, the hull was wrong. It was a different ship entirely, a cargo vessel sunk by a submarine decades later in the middle of a world war. It was not the Waratah. After 22 years of searching, that man finally gave up. He had run out of ocean, he said. He no longer had any idea where to look. More than 115 years later, the Waratah has still never been found. 211 people remain out there in the deep, their resting place unknown. The sea off that coast is calm again now, the way it was the morning she passed. It gives no sign of what it holds and asks no questions in return. If you'd like to drift a little longer through the mysteries the world has never given back, then stay a while and let the quiet carry you. Sleep well.